right, now welcome back to my podcast. I got an interesting guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
Who am I? An existential question right out of the
Right?
box, Sean. I love it. I'm Paul Sullivan, founder of the Company of Dads, based outside of New York City. For 25 years, I was a journalist, most of that time at the New York Times. And in February 2022, I launched the Company of Dads as a media company, community platform, and workplace advocate for lead dads. And a lead dad is the go-to parent, whether he works full-time, part-time, or devotes all of his time to his family. Many cases, those lead dads also support their spouses in their careers, but we know that 18% of all fathers in the United States are divorced, widowed, or otherwise single, and they're very much a part of the Company of Dads.
That's really interesting. And I never had heard the term lead dad before, but then that's what I am. My wife is a successful singer, and when we were, after our daughter was born, we had this time period where, I worked in education and video production. We had this choice of, one of us has to go back, and she makes more money than I do as an entertainer. And so, and my career allows me to be more flexible. I can work from home. I can have that. And especially when we move forward, having a background as an educator, I really took the lead for my daughter's early education and development. And, we have different roles, my wife and myself. Daddy's safe, daddy's stable, daddy's the structure, and mommy's fun. Which is awesome. We have those different roles we play, but it was really interesting because at many times I felt very alone as a lead dad and didn't know who to talk to about that. And so it's really interesting to hear about this community you're starting. How did this ball start rolling for you? What really got you into this and to finding this need that needed to be met?
Yeah, it started as a personal journey back in 2013. I've got three daughters who are now almost 6, almost 11, and almost 14. And back then, I had only 2, and they were 4 and 1. And my wife, who works in financial services, she was going to start her own firm. That was her dream. I was at the New York Times. I'd written a book. As I said, I was fulfilling my potential. So I said to her, go ahead, have at it. You're great at what you do. You should do it now. And she went to her then partner and try to have this civil conversation that they would, unwind things in a orderly manner, put the client first, all that stuff. And it didn't quite go that way. The next day she was locked out, cut off. The attorney sent her papers, and quite quickly she had to go from this sort of 3-month runway to starting her firm immediately. And the first thing she said to me, she says, well, what are we going to do with the kids? And I said, well, I'll become the lead dad. And she said, well, what does that mean? And I said, I don't really know, but it's better that I say I'm the lead dad than that I panic. That's not going to get us anywhere. But the truth was, I was able to sort of control my schedule. Like being a columnist for the New York Times, the columns due same time every week. Everything kind of runs more or less in a very predictable way. Books take years to write. Nobody calls you up and asks you to give a keynote talk in Vegas, 3 days later. Everything in my life could be planned out. And I loved it. But at the same time, my kids live in I said we're outside New York City, a commuter town in Connecticut, where most of the caregiving is done by moms or paid caregivers. It's not a role that you see a lot of men embracing. So I didn't go around town saying, Paul Sullivan, lead dad. I went around town saying, Paul Sullivan, so-and-so's dad, or Paul Sullivan, New York Times columnist. But it was really during the COVID lockdown here in the U.S. where I started to think, differently, because I'd been working 3 days a week from home, 2 days going into the city or traveling, whatever it was. And suddenly, like so many people, white collar workers, so many of us, we were home all the time. And I said, this is really different. I wish there must be some sort of, group of guys where I can talk to them. I'm not like this super macho guy, but nor would I describe myself as a stay-at-home dad. We call them lead dads who devote all their time to their family. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with either of those. It's just not who I was. And when I went on the good old Google to see what there was a ton of stuff for moms. Everything for parents, though, was also really for moms. It wasn't for dads. Anything for fathers was really dads in some sort of distress or fulfilling, an immediate need, like a dad who just got divorced and was trying to figure stuff out. And there wasn't anything like this. And so, like any journalist, I started doing research. I said, I wonder how many men are out there who are lead dads or who could qualify as lead dads. And all of this data in the U.S. is super readily available. The U.S. Census asks you all types of questions. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks all kinds of stuff. You could find it. And I was surprised and shocked but also heartened to know that there are about 20 to 25 million men in the U.S. who are lead dads or could be lead dads. Now, there's 75 million fathers, 125 million men all total, but it's still a significant number of men. And after that, I started thinking, okay, is this really a thing? I'm doing it, but it's kind of, do I know any other lead dads? I don't know. I'm gonna ask working moms. I'm gonna ask working moms who really care about their careers. I'm gonna ask them, what do you think about this idea of a lead dad? Do you have a lead dad in your life? And of course, they all came back. This is an amazing idea. My husband is the lead dad, or else I wouldn't be, XYZ, or, oh my goodness, my husband feels really isolated. He's the lead dad, and that allows me to do, 1, 2, 3. And of course, you had some people who said, no, my husband isn't the lead dad, but I sure as hell wish he was because I'm so busy and I have to do all this other stuff. And those conversations really showed me that the numbers were there, but also the anecdotal evidence was there for this market. And so, end of 21, I ended my column at the New York Times, and in February 22. We launched a company of dads to do 3 things, media, community, and workplace advocacy. And so far, so good. We're off to the races.
That's awesome. And it's there's an interesting point of this transition too, that 2 things that you said there. One was with you starting this company and then your wife starting hers, that so often people have this vision that some type of transition is going to be smooth, and sometimes things are messy, but yet it is, we have different ways to make make it through that transition. What were some of the things that what were some of the ways that you overcame any of the obstacles that you were facing as you started forming this company and started putting this together? And were there many obstacles that you faced?
The obstacles for the company, the obstacle for the company is time. It's me, a co-founder, and 4 other people. So that's the obstacle for our growth is time. The obstacle, though, like to being a lead dad, that was a different story. Now I joke I'm the leadiest lead dad in America. Is the leading lead dad at the company of dads. But the obstacle before is you're not accepted. You're not, here we are, most lead dads are advocates for women in the workplace. Like we want everybody to have a fair shake, but you go to a playground in the US and as a dad, you're not seen as a parent. You're seen as a man, and you stand out. And look, I'm a white guy who lives in Connecticut, so cry me a river for feeling like I'm standing out in my life. But it's a bigger issue because in certain communities, these mom groups, whether they're stay-at-home moms or working moms, these mom groups are the keepers of all the knowledge in a community. My town has about 20,000 people. If you want to figure out a dance recital, if you want to figure out a sport, if you want to figure out a high school or a college kid to babysit for you, you need to be in these communities on Facebook or on WhatsApp. And if you're not, that knowledge is not, for you. So breaking into that was difficult. What did I do? I would just impersonate my wife on her phone. She didn't really seem to care. My wife was quite busy, so that was fine by her. But, what was the thing that helped me sort of myself? And that was a sense of humor. And I've always taken my work very seriously, but I don't take me too seriously. And there are all kinds of slights, all the time, and that this isn't just from moms who leave you off, and by leaving me off, they're by extension leaving my kids off of things, because my wife has 43,000 unread emails on her phone. Every time I look at it, it gives me like stress. I have like 7 unread emails, and that bothers me. So it's a complete, extreme. But the birthday party invites, if I'm not on them, they're going to get buried in there. We had this happen a couple weeks ago. I showed up with one of my daughters at a birthday party, and they're like, "Hey man, it's been moved to next week. Didn't you get the email?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't get the email because you only sent it to my wife, you idiots.
Yeah.
2023, come on." But it's not just that. It's, schools. The school, you put dad could be top of the list of the people to call at the school, and they still call the mom. Pediatricians, they still call the mom. Don't even get me started on the dentist. The dentist is the bane of my existence. Like, you'll talk to one person and make the appointment, then they'll confirm it with the other. And it's crazy, stupid, ridiculous, because so many of those people making the call to the wrong parent in these institutions, in schools, in doctors' offices, in dentist offices, are themselves working moms. So it's not as if the school called them, they would be able to drop everything. They would want their partner or spouse to be called as well. So it's kind of pushing past and trying to change that. And once we got over to actually starting the company of dads, it's all about, one of the things we do is advocacy for this and pointing out this. We're not asking for huge changes. This is not, giving every kid in America an iPad, as if that would even be a good thing. I don't think that'd be a very good thing. This is literally normalizing a parenting role. And there are 25 million men in America who are or could be, lead dads. That's a third of all fathers. So it's substantial.
It's interesting because as you were talking about that, today I had my daughter's parent-teacher conference, and my wife is traveling. And, we walk in the room, we sit down, and they look up and they say, "Where's your wife?" And I was like, "Well, I'm here. I'm the parent that's here." And they're like, "Will she be able to join us later?" And I was like, "No, she's traveling." And I'm an educator of 20 years. I think that I can handle hearing about my daughter's education. I'm pretty sure that I can do pretty well with that, And they were like, "Are you sure she can't come?" I was like, "Yes, I'm here."
You should, at that point, you should have jumped up, and you should have, when they first asked that question, you should have jumped up and like, "Where is she? Did you lose her? What? She told me she was going to be here. Where? Oh, did you lose my wife? Come on."
Yeah, right. That would have been awesome, actually. That was great. That would be great. But there was just this look of like surprise and, like absolute bewilderment about like, well, we're going to have to do this differently. And I mean, and I'm dealing with a second culture as well. It's not even the States. And so,
Sure.
There are even more of those roles. But I'm curious as to when you start talking to some of these lead dads, what are some common misconceptions or stereotypes surrounding lead dads, and how does the company help challenge and break those?
Yeah, a big misconception is that they had no other option, that they fell into this, and of course, in so many cases, it's a choice, and it's a discussion that
Mm-hmm.
these men had with their spouses. I mean, largely wives, but we have many same sex couples part of the company of dads, and it's a discussion that they had to see who had either greater flexibility or greater rigidity in their schedules, or a greater desire to do this. With my wife and me, I just, as I said before, had a super predictable schedule, and she had zero predictability, particularly starting her own firm. Like, somebody could call her at 6 in the morning, somebody could call her at 6 at night, as we were sitting down for dinner, and she didn't have a choice; she had to take it. And so I had, I could choose to do this. So that's a big, misconception that men just, fell into this. The second is that, if they had a choice, they would do something else. And I found that that's not the case either. I had a coffee this morning with a guy, who I never in a million years would have guessed was a lead dad in my town. He works in sports marketing, and he has been able to, change up his life. His wife is an attorney. He works in sports marketing. They have 5 kids, and he's taken on this role of lead dad, and he loves it. And, some of his more macho buddies, they don't get it. They're like, well, when are you going to go back? Or don't you want to,
Mm.
do this again? He's like, no, what I'm doing is what I want to do. And he finds great joy. And one of the things we've advocated for at the company of dads is for certain companies to allow people to work a care shift. And if you think about, factory workers, they always work a shift, whatever those hours are, you work a shift. And a care shift is a version of that for sort of office workers. And the idea being is that somebody would, commit to working, an hour in the morning before their kids go to school, then work, solidly while the kids are in school. So in the States, that would be like, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. or 9:30 to 3
Yep.
p.m. and then commit again to do an hour work at night. So you still get to your 8-hour shift,
Yep.
but you're doing it in a way that allows you to care for your school age children as well. And that's been, well received. And I'd say, a third thing that I'd say is a sort of misconception is that somehow, you know, uh, you're less masculine. You're less masculine in becoming a lead dad. And one of the most joyful things that I've found in starting the company of dads is I've been able to unify men around the United States who are lead dads but come from wildly different backgrounds. And I tell the story of this guy who's become a dear friend of mine. He was a professional football player, played in the NFL, won a Super Bowl, was part of a team that won the Super Bowl for the Philadelphia Eagles. Sacked some guy named Tom Brady, who, the most famous football player in the world, intercepted him, has the Tom Brady ball. And he is a lead dad. He's a lead dad to his two daughters. He's divorced. He has full custody of his kids, and it's wonderful. One, he's my pal. Two, I don't know anything about the NFL or football in general, so we have conversations about fatherhood and kids. And three, his kids get along with me, but we get along with my kids before. He is the most masculine guy you could imagine
Yeah.
in the world because he put Tom Brady on the ground again and again and again, and yet he's wonderful and open about being a lead dad. And so that's, having somebody like that as part of the company dads is really great to challenge these misconceptions about, masculinity and fatherhood.
That's amazing. And I think that's we get these projections placed upon us about what a dad is supposed to be like. And I think what I saw with my dad is my dad, he didn't he didn't play by the rules as a father. Like, he just was whatever we needed. And like, there were days where he would, and he worked hard, and but he would always try to do things his way. And we would have these adventures that were, a pivotal part of my memories of my father are, these wild adventures that we would go on. And, and he would just, that was his thing. And, it was challenging for him. He was not a lead dad, but I think that my point being, there's no book for fatherhood. There's no guidebook, and people are making it up as they go. They have what their dad, what their parents showed them. And yet culturally, we have there's this idea put upon us that a dad has to look a certain way. And yet it's much different. It should be much more flexible, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah. And I mean, I would be happier if more men just made it up as they went along, because I think what is happening for those, 50 million men who are not lead dads is they're trying to fit themselves into some sort of mold that has been presented in the popular culture as to what a father is. A father is a provider. A father is stern. We were out in LA last year with the Gina Davis Institute, which does a lot of work into sort of representation in the media. And they talked about fathers being portrayed as stereotypes. They were angry, they were bumbling, they were absent. And, sure, it's on some sort of silly sitcom. Everybody loves Raymond. Look at Raymond. He's kind of bumbling. He does it. But it has an impact on the broader culture.
Yeah.
And the other part is, there was a time, I was born in the 1970s. My dad was not a lead dad. My dad was not really around in the 80s when I kind of remember it. And what was he doing? He was traveling around working. And then after work, he would go to the bar and he'd drink doers and talk to his buddies, and he'd come home late. And, shock. My parents ended up getting divorced. But that way he was trying to figure out, fit into a role that he thought was what you should do. And of course, yeah, his great grandfather. I don't know. I could have asked him the questions in real time. I don't know if he wanted to do something differently, but we need to set up, different models to show the positive aspects of being a lead dad, and that's what we're trying to do. And the flip side is, look, there's a selfish component to this, not the for-profit business part, but the selfish component is I have 3 daughters, and I want my daughters to be able to do whatever they want when they grow up. And I want to reduce the systemic structural biases that my wife certainly has faced
Yeah.
in her career. So that, look, and if my daughter wants to be the lead mom, fantastic. But I want that to be a choice that she was able to make and not something that was expected of her just because of her gender.
I'm with you as well. It's interesting that my daughter is the child of a celebrity, and like people see her here and they see, oh, she's so tall, she's so thin, she should be a model. She can be whatever she wants to be. If that's what she wants, great. If she wants to be a doctor, great. If she wants to be a scientist, great. It's about empowering her, and that's what has helped me as a father to really embrace being a lead dad, is to look at this: how can I help shape her path by not telling her what to do, but kind of like holding space to create this space that she can explore things, that she enjoys, and to find her path. But I have to be conscious in my parenting process. I have to be actively engaged. Otherwise, it's not possible.
And you tell that story, and I think, like, if you were growing up in my town in Connecticut, and your daughter's the child of a celebrity, and she's tall, people here would say, "Holy cow, get her playing volleyball. She'll get a volleyball scholarship to Harvard. Do you understand how they need more?" And I'm like, what? And so, yeah, we are. If we are not conscious of this, we get stuck in this rut of like, okay, what is the box that I'm supposed to put my child in? And it's a
Mhm.
lot. It's lazy. It's lazy parenting. It's a lot more work to be conscious and say, okay, you know, what does my daughter or son, need and want, and how can I parent to be a guide? I always say, like, I've already been to college. I've already been to graduate school. I'm not going to live. I already was mediocre at sports as a kid. I don't need to, live vicariously through you. I need to try to be the best parent I can, and put up these guardrails. You don't go too far out of bounds here and there, but literally try to teach you to drive on that pretty wide road, except when you bounce against the sides. And that's what, I aim to do. That's what I hope that the company of dads can do, is to help the whole family, not just dads, not just moms, but help the whole family fulfill its full potential, whatever that may be.
Where where would you like to see a company of dads going? Where would you like to see this in 10 years and 20 years?
We like to be the CNN of fatherhood. So we'd like to be, the go-to stop, not just for lead dads, but for all fathers who want to get information. I mean, there's a huge dearth of trusted information around simple, fathering questions. We just launched this thing called the Lead Dad Library. It's, small. We've got to build the archive, but it's to help guys with, common questions that you would have, and to have a trusted space to go to. And we use CNN as a model because you can tune into CNN in Vietnam, and you know it's CNN. You're going to look at the branding, you know that this is CNN, but it's very localized to the Vietnamese market. And it's very different than if you're watching CNN in New York, or if you're watching CNN in London, or if you're watching, CNN in, Cape Town, South Africa, but it's still CNN. And that's our goal, because we had a limited run podcast called the Global Dads council. And the whole idea was to talk to people similar to me, other men running fatherhood organizations in different parts of the country. Now, it was limited because we needed people who could speak English, so it wasn't really global, but it's a better title than the dads who speak English in different parts of the world podcast. That's a bit too long. But it was a guy from London, a guy from Mumbai, and a guy from Singapore. And it really showed that while we're all dads, while we all had different needs, it showed me as a founder of Company Dads that the approach had to be localized, because instead of this thing being the roaring success that I thought it would be, it was kind of a middling effort. And that was largely because you could ask the same question, but the responses and the cultural context of the answers to those questions were so different. Now, there's still fathers who are deeply involved, fathers who are still caring very much, fathers who are challenging systemic pressures where they had to be only the breadwinner and their wives had to only be the caregiver. But we realized then that we needed to have more of a localized approach for the Company of Dads.
Well, that's really awesome. Well, how about, have you witnessed any stories or had any transformative experiences of people that were working with a company of dads?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've had, the positive ones are stories of belonging, of people who suddenly, never called themselves a lead dad before, didn't really know what to call themselves. There's this one guy who's become a good pal. Franco is his first name. And he was a lead dad, who is a lead dad who devotes all of his time to his family. But it was really difficult. His wife had a successful career. It was difficult for him to go to these parties with his wife. And people would say, what do you do for a living? And when he didn't have the term lead dad until we really popularized it. And he struggled. And so he started not making up a story, but they owned a couple of apartments as sort of, an investment. But by couple, I mean like 2 or 3, and he started saying that, well, I manage my real estate. I manage my family's real estate portfolio. And that was enough for the people at the party to say, oh, okay, I understand what you do. But now he started saying, I'm a lead dad. And that is a conversation starter in a different way, because one, it connotes power, it connotes choice, it connotes something, proactive. And we have, scores of stories like that. The flip side, though, is that, because of the stigma against men as caregivers, even though there are so many of us in the United States and so many of us, globally, because of that stigma, some men, particularly those who devote all their time to the family, can struggle with mental health issues. Like, what is my worth? Is my self-worth and my net worth, linked? Am I less of a man because I'm, not earning more money? My wife earns, and this all comes back to sort of, cultural expectations that are placed on us. And like, look, I'm part of a generation where we can challenge these cultural expectations. My father's generation didn't have that luxury. You just had to do it. But the inspiring part is when I look at lead dads I'm talking to in their 20s and 30s, it wasn't something they've been thinking about it from before they had children, and they've been having conversations with their spouses, and they know, as we say often in the community, you may be the lead dad for some portion of time. You may be the lead dad for 5, 6, 7 years, and then maybe it changes. Maybe, careers changes or expectations changes, and your wife becomes the lead mom, and that's fine. But this group in their 20s and 30s, they're really inspiring because they're thinking this through, having these discussions. But, companies, at least here in the US, that are slow to change, they're not going to have a choice, because these are the future of their workforce. And they're saying, we want to work differently. We want to work more intentionally, and happy to come in the office, but we want to come into the office for a reason, not just because that's what everyone has always done or everyone always did until 2019.
That's awesome. Now, let me ask you this. For any of the lead dads out there listening to this that are wanting to know, well, what should they be doing? What should some next steps be? What are some things that lead dads should really be considering to kind of get started in this process of this self-identification and from, this journey of discovery?
I mean, I call it, broadly, educate yourself. And that's, the company of dads serves as this resource in that educate yourself and know that not only are you not alone in this, and it may seem like you're alone in whatever town or city you live in, there are, tens of millions of men in the US and many millions more around the globe who are in this role silently already. I started at the beginning telling a story on how I'd go around my town in Connecticut and didn't really say, Paul Sullivan, lead dad. It was, Paul Sullivan, so and so's father, or Paul Sullivan, New York Times columnist. But as soon as I started the company of dads, men who I would not have, who also were doing the same thing I was doing, started coming up to me. They started emailing me, guys that I've known for 5 years, 10 years, and they've come up to me and said, "Hey, I want to be part of this. I'm a lead dad. I never knew the term before. I'm a lead dad." So it's to honestly know that you're not alone. It doesn't make you less masculine to do this. And if anything, it's going to be something that's deeply fulfilling for you, but also for your entire family. So just go to thecompanydads.com and start educating yourself in just how many other men have chosen this role, and to know that if you choose this role, if you're able to choose this role, you're part of a large caring community, and you're not alone.
That's awesome. One last question for you as your role as lead dad, because it seems that you also continued your career in some way, shape, or form during this time of being a lead dad. How did you find work-life balance between being a lead dad and having a business professional on the other side?
I got to give some credit to Apple and the ability to, have a calendar on the iPhone that could be synced to everybody, in my family, from my wife to my teenage daughter when she got a phone, to my dad, so that people would know who's doing what when. And so it really came down to, super organization. And before I left, my column in 2021, I mean, I wrote over 1 million words for the New York Times. I wrote 600 and they should know this, over 600 columns. Another 150 stories on different things. I ran special sections. I was, working full time plus and busy, but I was hyper organized and could, organize that. Now I was working, on the schedule set by the New York Times, so I didn't have. I had to work within those parameters. But one of the things I've done, since starting the company of dads, we don't have any, household help. So I've started to sort of, walk the walk and talk the talk. And in addition to being hyper organized, I've sort of pushed myself to work these care shifts that I advocate for. But it's really, I mean, I feel for people. One of my children has ADHD, and she struggles with executive functioning. So it is more challenging if you can't be hyper organized. But that was really the key. And then, like I said earlier in this interview, a really good sense of humor. Because if you can't laugh at yourself, you're screwed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I really appreciate this. It's been insightful, and as a lead dad, it's also so often in life we don't realize that we are not alone, and people get stuck in their own heads, and it's not even that you don't want to ask. Sometimes you don't know who to ask. You don't know where to look for information. You don't know that there are people who can comprehend it, and like you said, like for one, I experienced a ton of guilt for a long time, like, hey, I should be, and it's not like I wasn't working my butt off. I ran our entire media company for my wife. I did all of our stuff. Plus I parented our daughter, but yet I still felt guilt about not making enough money, and not bringing in more, and it was just like, the reality was that we were making all the money we were because of what I was doing, and yet there was still that guilt.
Right.
And I
All
think
the
it was
back end
just
stuff that had to be
cultural.
done. Yeah. Yeah. Look, and that's it. Like, had I gone in April of 2020, had I gone online and typed in what I was looking for and found that something like the Company of Dads already existed, I would still be a New York Times columnist. I'd still be, I'd be working on my third book. I loved everything about that. But I just saw such a gaping need. And if I couldn't, find it, a guy who finds information for a living, like I track people down all over the place. That's part of being a journalist for 25 years. If I couldn't find that, then other people weren't going to either. And then I just started thinking, you know what? I've had an amazing run. Like maybe I can turn this need, this passion into something that, will make the world just a little bit better. And that's the goal of the company dads. Like make the world a little bit better, make people feel better about themselves and be more, inclusive as a society.